The snow started falling slowly at first, soft and quiet, blanketing the mountain town in white. By afternoon, the flakes were thick and fast, sweeping across the streets and covering every roof and tree. He watched from his small cabin window, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The wind howled outside, rattling the panes and pushing drifts against the walls. It was the kind of storm that made the world feel far away and small. The kind of storm that reminded a person how alone they could be even among neighbors. He had lived in this town for years, tucked in at the edge where the mountains started to rise, and he knew the winter here could be cruel. He had always prepared for storms, stocking firewood and food, checking his roof and gutters, but this one felt different. It was heavier, relentless, almost alive, and there was a sharp edge to the cold that seeped through his thick coat whenever he went outside to check the paths. In the small garden behind the cabin, the roads were empty and silent, all movement swallowed by snow and wind. A few lights flickered in the distance where other houses stood, but mostly there was nothing. Only the endless white and the occasional shadow of a tree bending under the weight of ice. He had never felt so small in his life. Watching the world shrink under a blizzard, he thought about the neighbors he had seen over the years. The few who would brave the weather for supplies or for company, and his mind went to her. She had lived a few cabins down, closer to the forest, and he realized he had not seen anyone come or go from her place all day. That made him uneasy. She had always been careful, but also independent and resilient. If she had been caught unprepared, he knew she would have found a way to manage. But still, the thought of her alone in the storm sent a shiver through him. Memories of past winters with her came unbidden. Small moments that had seemed ordinary at the time. A warm smile when the first snow fell. The way she had offered him tea on a morning when the world was frozen and gray. The quiet conversations by the fire when the wind was too strong to venture outside. He had admired her courage and the calm way she faced everything, even when life was difficult. Those memories were bittersweet, carrying a weight now he could not shake. He dressed carefully, pulling on layers of wool in his thick boots, wrapping a scarf tightly around his neck. Every step outside was a battle against the wind and the snow, and he had to pause frequently to catch his breath and steady himself. The snow was deep, reaching above his knees in some places, and the path from his cabin to the main road had disappeared completely. He used the outline of the trees and rocks to guide him, trusting his memory more than his eyes. As he walked, he noticed the tracks in the snow. There were faint impressions of footprints, but it was hard to tell if they were hers or someone else's, if they were fresh or old. The wind had already begun to cover them, erasing clues as quickly as they appeared. He pressed on, driven by a mix of concern and instinct, feeling the cold seep into his bones but ignoring it, focusing on the distant shape of her cabin through the storm. The forest began to loom around him, trees heavy with snow, branches creaking and groaning under the weight. He had walked this path before in winter, but never with a storm like this. And the world felt different somehow, unfamiliar and threatening. Each shadow seemed to move, each sound amplified and distorted. He had to force himself to stay calm, to keep one foot in front of the other, even as fear tried to take hold. Hours passed, though it could have been minutes or days, and the cold became more intense. His hands and face stung, his legs ached from trudging through the snow. But he kept going, driven by the thought of her alone in the cabin. Every step brought him closer to a place he both longed to reach and dreaded to find. He thought about what he might discover, and the thought twisted in his chest. What if she had left? What if she needed help? What if it was too late? Finally, through the white haze, he saw the outline of her cabin. It was mostly buried under snow, but the shape was unmistakable, familiar and comforting. He ran the last few steps, slipping and sliding but refusing to stop, until he reached the door. There was no sign of movement, no smoke from the chimney, no sound inside. He knocked softly at first, then louder, hoping the wind had just drowned out any response. He called her name, his voice almost swallowed by the storm. Inside, the cabin was quiet, eerily so. The door opened easily, and the cold hit him like a wall, biting at his face and hands. He stepped inside, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. The fire pit in the center was cold, the wood untouched. and a thin layer of snow had blown in from the door, dusting the floor like powdered sugar. A cup on the table was tipped over, but empty, and the chair beside it was still. There was no sign of her. He moved through the cabin slowly, checking every corner, listening for any sound. The silence pressed against him, heavy and unyielding, and he felt a pang of panic. She should have been here. She always made sure to light the fire, to leave something ready for anyone who might come. The thought of her out in the storm, struggling and alone, tightened something inside him. He found a small note on the table, partially covered by snow. His heart leaped as he picked it up, hoping it was a simple message, a note to explain her absence. He brushed off the snow and unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was hers, familiar and precise, and the words were strange and haunting. She had written about the storm, about the danger, and about leaving something behind that he would find. He did not understand it fully, but he felt a cold dread settle over him. The note seemed like a warning and a confession all at once, a message meant to reach him, but from a distance he could not yet measure. He stood there, staring at the words as the wind howled outside. The storm seemed to grow louder, as if it knew the effect it had on him, as if it wanted to remind him of his helplessness. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what she meant, trying to plan what to do next, but every thought was drowned by the storm and the emptiness of the cabin. Hours passed again. Though time felt suspended, and he remained in the cabin, reading and rereading the note, feeling the weight of her words pressing on him. The snow outside showed no sign of letting up, and he realized he was trapped too, unable to leave until the blizzard passed. He had always faced winters alone, but this felt different. This was not just nature he was facing, it was uncertainty, fear, and the looming presence of someone he cared about deeply and did not fully understand. As the night fell, the cabin dark except for the dim light through the snow-covered windows. He felt exhaustion settle in, but he could not rest. He kept thinking of her, of what she might be doing, and of the note she had left. It was a puzzle, a warning and a memory all at once. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he could not ignore it. He could not stop thinking, could not stop feeling, could not stop fearing. And so he waited, alone in the small cabin at the edge of the forest, as the blizzard raged on outside. Each gust of wind, each crack of ice, each swirl of snow reminded him of the vastness of the world and the smallness of his place in it. But it also reminded him of her and of the strange, powerful connection they shared, a bond that the storm could not erase and that he could not abandon. He held the note in his hands and stared out at the white expanse. Knowing that whatever came next would change everything, he left the cabin the next morning with a resolve that felt heavier than the snow on his shoulders. The blizzard had not passed, though it had slowed, leaving the world in a muffled silence broken only by the occasional groan of frozen trees. He followed the faint traces he had seen the day before, unsure if they were fresh or old, his eyes straining to make sense of shadows that could be anything in the white world. The cold bit through every layer of clothing he had, numbing his fingers and toes, but he pressed on. Feeling the urgency of the search like a weight in his chest, the footprints led him through areas he had rarely ventured alone, paths he had walked in the summer when the snow was gone and the forest was alive with color. Now the trees were heavy with ice, their branches bending low, ground hidden beneath a thick, unbroken blanket of white. Every step was a struggle, the snow pulling at his boots, making each movement slow and exhausting. The wind carried flakes into his eyes, forcing him to squint and shield his face, but he could not stop. He could not turn back. As he moved deeper into the forest, he noticed small signs that she had been there. A branch snapped where she must have stepped, an imprint in the snow that was more distinct than the others, a faint trail of disturbed powder that suggested someone had struggled through the storm. His heart quickened, and he followed these signs, careful not to lose them. Moving steadily despite the cold and the fatigue, time seemed meaningless as he pushed forward. Minutes stretched into hours, and every small movement felt like a battle against nature. The snow was relentless, piling against trees, filling in footprints almost as soon as they appeared. He had to move quickly and carefully, balancing the need for speed with the need to stay on the path. The faint trail of evidence guiding him through the frozen landscape. His breath came in short, visible bursts, each one a reminder of how fragile he was in the face of the storm. He came to a frozen river, its surface hard and slick, and paused, unsure if he could cross. The ice looked thin in places, cracking under the weight of snow and wind. He tested it carefully, tapping with his boot, feeling for weak spots. He could see the path continue on the other side, leading up a small rise where the forest opened into a clearing. The thought of turning back never crossed his mind. He had to keep going. Step by step, he made his way across the ice, heart pounding, muscles tensed. The river moaned beneath him, a sound that made him shiver. He focused on the far edge, imagining her waiting there, struggling, needing him, and that thought drove him forward. He made it safely, sliding slightly, but managing to regain his balance. He stood there for a moment, catching his breath, feeling the cold bite at him, then moved on. Each step, a mixture of caution and determination. The forest began to thin, and he reached a small hill overlooking the valley. The snow stretched endlessly, covering everything he had known, transforming familiar landscapes into something unrecognizable. He looked around, searching for any sign of her, any hint that she was still nearby. The wind whipped at his face, carrying the sharp scent of ice and pine, and he felt a sudden pang of doubt. Maybe he was too late. Maybe the storm had taken her before he could reach her. The thought made his stomach twist, but he pushed it aside. Focusing on what he could control, he descended into the valley slowly, moving carefully through drifts that were nearly as tall as he was. Each step was an effort, and he had to stop often, leaning on his walking stick, trying to catch his breath. He saw no footprints now, only the marks he had made himself, a solitary reminder that he was alone. The idea of being alone in the storm pressed against him, but he could not give in. He had to keep moving, following the faint trail he hoped would lead him to her. Hours passed. The sun low in the sky, casting a pale light that barely penetrated the clouds. He stumbled upon a small outbuilding, half buried in snow, and paused to rest, leaning against its wooden wall. He could see the tops of other structures in the distance, indications of a small settlement. But there was no movement, no signs of life. The world was frozen, quiet, as if it held its breath, waiting for something to happen. He thought of her, alone somewhere in this white expanse, and the thought made him shiver despite his layers of clothing. He pushed on, following the contours of the land, moving toward a stand of trees where he thought he had seen smoke earlier. The snow had filled in any clear paths, and he had to rely on his memory and intuition. The faint instincts honed over years of walking these mountains. Every sound was amplified. Every movement in the distance made him stop and listen. The forest was alive in its own way, the branches creaking under snow, the ice shifting in the undergrowth, but he saw no sign of her. And still, he did not turn back. By late afternoon, he began to tire, his muscles aching, his lungs burning with cold and effort. He had eaten little and drunk less, conserving what he had brought with him. The blizzard had lessened, but had not ended, and the snow continued to fall in steady, soft waves that covered the tracks he had worked so hard to follow. He took a moment to rest, sitting on a fallen log, and pulled out a small notebook he carried. He wrote down what he had seen, the faint tracks, the broken branches, the frozen river, trying to make sense of the journey, to keep a record in case he failed to find her. As he rested, he heard a distant sound, faint but distinct. A cry, muffled by snow and wind, that could have been anything or anyone. His heart leapt, and he rose immediately, scanning the landscape. The sound came again, closer this time, more urgent. He ran toward it, boots sinking deep into the snow, following the echoes through the frozen trees. He called her name, voice, hoarse, from the cold, letting it carry over the snow and ice, hoping it would reach her. The sound led him to a small clearing, and there, half buried in snow, he saw a figure. Relief and fear collided in him, and he rushed forward, slipping and sliding but refusing to fall. It was her, sitting against a tree, shivering, her clothes wet and frozen. She looked up at him, eyes wide with exhaustion and fear, and he felt a wave of emotion so strong it almost knocked him over. He knelt beside her, speaking softly, wrapping his arms around her shoulders, trying to warm her, trying to convey that he was there, that she was safe now. She whispered a few words, broken and shaky, explaining how she had tried to reach a nearby cabin but had slipped and fallen, unable to get up in the deep snow. She had feared she would be trapped, alone, with no one to find her. He listened carefully, holding her close, feeling her trembling against him, and then helped her to her feet. Every step was slow and careful, guiding her through the snow. Leaning on him when she could not move on her own, they moved together toward his cabin. The blizzard still around them, but lessening as evening approached. He kept talking, softly, trying to keep her awake and focused, describing the path, pointing out the trees and rocks to help her remember. She clung to him, trusting him completely. And he felt a fierce determination to get her home, to keep her safe, to ensure that this storm, no matter how powerful, would not harm her again. By nightfall, they reached the edge of the forest, and the lights of his cabin were a welcome sight. He opened the door and helped her inside, removing wet layers and wrapping her in blankets. He started a fire, small but steady, and made her drink warm tea. She sat by the fire, exhausted, and he watched her, feeling a deep relief mixed with lingering worry. The storm had taken so much, and yet here she was, alive and in his care. He realized then how fragile life could be and how quickly things could change. And he resolved that he would not let another moment pass without protecting her, without understanding her fully, without acknowledging the bond that had grown between them in quiet moments over the years. As she drifted into a light, troubled sleep, he stayed awake, tending the fire in the cabin, listening to the wind outside. The blizzard had shown him the power of nature, the fragility of life, and the importance of presence. He knew the days ahead would bring more challenges, more revelations, but for now, he felt the strange mix of exhaustion and gratitude, knowing that despite the storm and the fear, they had survived together, and that he would never forget the hours spent in the snow, searching for her. Never forget the weight of fear and hope intertwined in that journey through the blizzard. The next morning, the cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of the fire. The snow outside had stopped falling, leaving a thick white layer that covered everything, transforming the landscape into something unrecognizable. He watched her sleep for a long time, noting the way her chest rose and fell, the strands of hair that had fallen across her face, and the pale color of her skin from the cold. He felt a mix of relief and unease, knowing that the storm had passed but that the danger had not entirely ended. There was still the letter she had left, the meaning of it pressing on him like a weight he could not shake. When she finally stirred, she looked around slowly, blinking as if waking from a long dream. She reached for the blanket and pulled it tighter around her shoulders, and he handed her a cup of warm tea. The simple gesture seemed to comfort her, and she took a few small sips, eyes distant, thinking about the journey she had made through the storm and the fear she had felt alone in the snow. He sat across from her, waiting for her to speak. Knowing that what she said next could change everything, she began to talk quietly, her voice low and trembling. She explained how she had tried to reach the nearest cabin after the storm began, thinking she could get help if needed, but the snow had been too deep and the wind too strong. Each step had been an effort, and when she slipped and fell, she had feared she would never get up. He listened carefully, watching her, noting the way her hands shook as she held the cup, trying to warm them. He asked questions gently, wanting to understand every detail without pressing too hard. And she answered in broken sentences, recounting her struggle through the snow and the fear that had filled her mind. After some time, she turned to the table and pointed at the letter she had written. Her eyes filled with tears as she told him that she had wanted to leave a message, to explain herself in a way she could not in person. He picked it up carefully, the paper slightly damp from the snow, and began to read again. Each word struck him like a hammer, revealing secrets he had not known, confessions about her past and thoughts she had kept hidden for years. He felt a deep sorrow and guilt, realizing how much he had not known about the woman who had become so important to him. The letter spoke of moments he had shared with her, moments that now carried a weight he had not felt before. It told of the times she had waited silently for him to notice, the sacrifices she had made to protect him from burdens he could not bear, and the quiet pain she had endured without complaint. He felt a lump in his throat, the realization that she had carried so much alone, and the shame of not recognizing it sooner pressed down on him. He looked at her, sitting across the table, fragile yet strong, and felt a mixture of admiration and sorrow. She watched him carefully as he read, her fingers tracing the edge of the cup. There was a hesitance in her movements, a fear that he might react in anger or disappointment. Instead, he felt a strange mixture of clarity and confusion, a recognition of truths that had been hidden and a desire to make amends. He put the letter down and reached for her hand, offering silent support. She allowed him to hold it, a small gesture that seemed to bridge the gap between fear and trust. The rest of the day passed slowly. They moved carefully around the cabin, doing small tasks together, gathering firewood, cleaning the space, and preparing simple meals. There was a quiet companionship, a rhythm that felt natural, despite the tension that lingered between them. Each glance carried unspoken thoughts, each small action a way of communicating without words. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes and knew that the physical and emotional toll of the storm was still present. He tried to ease it, offering help when needed, and she accepted, allowing herself to rely on someone else for the first time in what felt like a long while. In the afternoon, the sunlight broke, casting a pale glow across the snow outside. He stepped to the window and looked out, thinking about the path they had taken through the storm and the danger that had been so close. The landscape was beautiful yet harsh, a reminder of the power of nature and the fragility of life. She joined him, standing quietly at the window, her gaze following his. They did not speak, the silence carrying a weight of understanding, of shared experience, and of acknowledgement that the world outside had tested them both in ways they could not fully express. She finally spoke again, her voice steadier, explaining why she had written the letter. She told him of fears and regrets she had carried for years, of choices she had made in secret to protect him from truths he was not ready to face. Each word added a layer to his understanding, revealing the depth of her character and the complexity of her decisions. He listened without interruption, realizing that the bond they shared was built not only on friendship, but on the silent recognition of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. As evening approached, they sat together by the fire, the warmth of the flames contrasting with the cold world outside. She began to tell stories of her childhood, memories of winters much like this one, of lessons learned from the harshness of the mountains, of moments of joy hidden among hardship. He listened intently, absorbing every detail, understanding that her life had been shaped by resilience, courage, and a quiet determination to endure. The stories were simple, yet they carried weight, revealing the essence of who she was and why she had become the person he admired so deeply. He shared some stories of his own, memories of his family and past winters, small moments of triumph and failure, laughter and sorrow. She listened with interest, asking questions, sometimes laughing quietly, sometimes reflecting silently. The exchange was gentle, intimate, a way of reconnecting and rebuilding trust. The fire flickered between them, casting shadows that danced across the walls, and he felt a sense of closeness that had not existed before the storm. A recognition that survival had a way of forging bonds that ordinary days could not. Later, as darkness fell outside and the first stars began to appear in the clear night sky, they moved to prepare for rest. She lay on a bed near the fire, wrapped in blankets, and he stayed nearby, tending the fire and ensuring that the cabin remained warm. He could hear her breathing slowly, steadily, and felt a deep sense of responsibility and care. The letter lay on the table, a reminder of the truths revealed, the fears faced, and the connection that had grown stronger through adversity. He reflected on the events of the past days, the blizzard that had seemed so terrifying, the journey through snow and cold, and the discovery of the letter. He realized that every step, every moment of fear and determination had led to a deeper understanding of their bond, and of the fragility and strength of life. The storm had been a test, a challenge that revealed character and courage, and he felt both humbled and inspired by her resilience. The night passed slowly, filled with quiet thoughts and reflection. The snow outside remained thick, but still, the harshness of the blizzard now softened into a blanket of peace. He sat by the window for long hours, watching the moonlight glint off the frozen landscape, thinking about the journey that lay ahead, the truths to be explored, and the ways he could support and understand her better. The connection between them had shifted, deepened by shared experience, and he knew that the days ahead would require patience, understanding, and care. Morning came again, pale and soft, and with it a sense of possibility. They moved carefully through the cabin, attending to small tasks, sharing quiet conversations, and preparing for the day. He felt a renewed determination to face whatever challenges the world might present, to honor the bond they had forged, and to ensure that the lessons learned in the storm would not be forgotten. Each moment was filled with awareness, care, and a quiet gratitude for survival, for connection. And for the fragile beauty of life in the mountains, the letter remained on the table, a silent witness to their experiences, a reminder of truths faced and fears shared. It would continue to shape their understanding, guiding them through conversations and reflections, a tangible symbol of courage, honesty, and the power of communication. He glanced at it often, feeling a mixture of sorrow, respect, and hope, knowing that the journey through the storm had changed them both and that the path ahead, though uncertain, was one they would face together. The morning after the storm brought a quiet tension to the cabin. The sun shone weakly through the snow-covered windows, casting pale light across the floor. He sat at the table, staring at the letter again, unable to tear his eyes away. Its words had revealed more than he had expected. Secrets she had carried for years now sat in front of him, and he felt the weight of every sentence pressing down on him. He knew that understanding them fully would take time. But the first step was to listen and observe, to try to piece together the truth of what had happened and what she had endured. She was awake now, sitting across from him with a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her eyes were steady, watching him carefully as if measuring his reaction. She spoke softly, explaining more about the choices she had made, about the path she had taken in life that he had never known. She spoke of fear, regret, and responsibility, of moments when she had felt helpless, and moments when she had been forced to act alone. He listened without interrupting, letting her words wash over him, knowing that his reactions mattered and that he needed to be patient and understanding. He realized that the letter had been a bridge between them, a way for her to communicate truths she had never said aloud. It was a revelation, a confrontation with the past that he had avoided without realizing it. As she spoke, he felt both sorrow and guilt, recognizing that he had not always seen the depth of her struggle. He could feel her strength and her vulnerability at the same time, a combination that made him ache with empathy and a desire to protect her from further pain. The hours passed slowly, the quiet of the cabin broken only by their voices and the occasional crackle of the fire. She recounted moments from the past, times when she had chosen paths that he had not understood, decisions that now seemed crucial to the person she had become. Each story revealed a layer of her character, showing her courage, her compassion, and her quiet determination to endure hardships without complaint. He felt both admiration and sorrow, wishing he could have known earlier, wishing he could have shared in her burdens. As the day wore on, he suggested that they go outside, to take in the world that had been frozen for days, and to see the changes the storm had wrought. They moved carefully, wrapped in layers, stepping onto the snow-covered ground. The landscape was transformed, trees bending under the weight of snow, rooftops barely visible, and tracks from animals crisscrossing the drifts. The beauty of the scene was stark and haunting, a reminder of the power of nature and the fragility of life. They walked slowly, pausing often, talking quietly. She spoke of the letter again, explaining why she had written certain parts and what she had hoped he would understand. He listened, asking questions only to clarify, never to challenge. The conversation was a careful dance, a way of connecting without forcing. of rebuilding trust and understanding through patient attention. He realized that the storm had not only tested their physical endurance, but it also created an opportunity to face emotional truths that had long been avoided. They returned to the cabin. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow, inside, he began to prepare a simple meal, chopping wood and stoking the fire. She watched quietly, her eyes distant but attentive, processing everything she had shared and everything he had absorbed. The letter remained on the table, a silent observer of the day, its presence a constant reminder of the revelations it had brought forth and the bond it had deepened. As evening fell, he suggested they sit by the fire together. The room was warm and quiet, the only sound the soft crackling of flames and the occasional pop of burning wood. She settled near the fire, her blanket wrapped around her. He took a chair across from her, holding the letter in his hands. He read parts of it aloud, not to question or judge, but to acknowledge, to honor the truths she had shared, and to show that he understood and respected her experiences. She listened quietly, her eyes soft, and for the first time he felt a deep connection that went beyond words. They spoke of the future in hushed tones, considering what the days ahead might bring. She expressed fears and uncertainties, and he offered support, not as a solution to her problems, but as a companion willing to share in the challenges and to offer care when needed. The conversation was gentle, deliberate, and human, a recognition that life was fragile and that understanding and empathy were crucial in navigating it. He realized that the letter had changed everything, creating a space for honesty and reflection that could not be undone. Night fell fully, the world outside silent except for the occasional gust of wind. He stayed by the fire, reading and rereading the letter, absorbing every nuance and every confession. She rested nearby, breathing steadily, and he felt a profound sense of responsibility. The storm had passed, but its effects remained, both physically in the altered landscape and emotionally in the truths that had been revealed. He knew that the path ahead would require patience, care, and a willingness to face uncomfortable realities. But he also knew that they had survived together and that their bond had been strengthened. By shared experience, he reflected on the choices they had made, the risks taken, and the moments of fear and courage. Each memory was vivid, each detail important, and he realized that understanding her fully would take time. The letter had opened a door, and he was committed to walking through it, step by step, with care and attention. The firelight flickered across the walls, casting shadows that seemed to echo the complexity of their experiences, the intertwining of fear, hope, and connection. As he watched her sleep, he thought about the journey they had endured, the blizzard that had tested their limits, and the revelations that had emerged from it. He felt a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. Recognizing that the storm had exposed truths that could not be ignored and had created a chance for deeper understanding, the letter remained on the table, a testament to courage and honesty, a reminder that life was fragile and that the bonds between people could be both complicated and resilient. He stayed awake for long hours, tending the fire and reflecting on the day, the letter, and the conversations they had shared. He thought about what he could do to support her, how he could honor the trust she had placed in him, and how he could navigate the truths revealed in the letter with care and compassion. The night passed slowly, filled with thought and reflection, and he knew that the journey was far from over. The letter had not destroyed him, but it had changed him, deepened his awareness, and challenged him to be present and attentive in ways he had not been before. Morning came again, bringing light and a sense of quiet renewal. The snow outside glistened, the landscape calm after the storm, and inside the cabin, a new day began. He prepared for the day carefully, mindful of the lessons learned from the blizzard and the revelations from the letter. She moved beside him, more steady now, her strength returning, and he felt a sense of hope tempered by understanding. The letter had revealed truths, but it had also created an opportunity for growth, connection, and empathy that would shape the days ahead. Together they moved through the cabin, attending to small tasks, sharing quiet moments, and reflecting on the storm and the letter. He realized that the bond they shared had been transformed, deepened by adversity and revelation, and that understanding her fully required not only listening but also action, care, and patience. The letter remained on the table, a symbol of the journey they had endured, the truths faced, and the resilience of the human spirit. As the day unfolded, he felt a determination to honor the trust and courage revealed in it. Knowing that the storm and the letter had created a foundation for something enduring, complex, and deeply human. The days after the blizzard passed slowly, each one bringing a quiet rhythm to life in the cabin. The snow outside glistened in the sunlight, covering the world in white, while inside, the warmth of the fire and the comfort of simple routines created a fragile sense of normalcy. He moved through the cabin carefully, aware of the letter on the table and the truths it held. It had changed everything, but it also offered a chance to understand, to connect, and to face the future with honesty and awareness. She had regained strength, moving more freely through the cabin, helping with small tasks, and speaking more openly about her experiences. They talked quietly, sharing thoughts and memories, exploring the revelations from the letter, and discovering new ways to understand each other. Each conversation was deliberate, patient, and human, a way of rebuilding trust and acknowledging the depth of the bond they shared. He listened carefully, absorbing her words, and responding with thoughtfulness and empathy. Recognizing the courage it had taken for her to reveal what she had written, they spent hours together by the fire, reading, talking, and reflecting on the events of the storm. The letter remained between them, a constant reminder of the past and a guide to the present. He read portions aloud again, not to judge or question, but to honor her experiences and to acknowledge the truths she had shared. She watched him carefully, her eyes revealing relief and cautious hope, and he felt a deep sense of responsibility and care. The letter had changed him, making him more aware of the fragility of life and the importance of presence, attention, and empathy as the days progressed. They ventured outside together, exploring the transformed landscape. The snow was thick, but no longer threatening, the blizzard having passed. Trees bent under the weight of ice, rooftops peeked through the snow, and the tracks of animals marked the drifts. They moved slowly, talking quietly, sharing observations and noticing small details that had gone unnoticed before. Each step was careful, deliberate, a way to experience the world and each other's company while acknowledging the fragility and beauty around them. He found himself reflecting on the letter constantly, considering its implications and the ways it had reshaped his understanding of her and of their relationship. He realized that the truths she had revealed were not burdens to bear alone, but opportunities to connect, support, and grow together. He felt a mixture of sorrow for the hardships she had faced, admiration for her strength, and a quiet determination to honor her courage through his actions and presence. She shared more of her thoughts, opening up about the fears and regrets she had carried for years. He listened with patience and empathy, asking questions only to clarify, never to challenge. The conversations were slow and deliberate, each one building understanding and trust. He felt the bond between them deepen, strengthened by shared experience, honesty, and the recognition of each other's resilience. The letter had been a catalyst, but the ongoing dialogue, care, and attention created a foundation that was now unshakable. Evenings were spent in quiet reflection, sitting by the fire, watching the flames dance, and listening to the occasional crackle of burning wood. She sometimes wrote in her own notebook, recording thoughts, memories, and reflections, while he read or thought quietly. The presence of the letter was a silent witness to these moments, reminder of the journey they had endured, the truths faced, and the connection that had grown stronger through adversity. He often glanced at it, feeling gratitude, respect, and a renewed sense of responsibility. One afternoon they decided to clear the path to the main road, working together to shovel snow and create a safe passage. The work was tiring but satisfying, a physical representation of their effort to move forward together. They spoke quietly as they worked, sharing observations and thoughts, supporting each other through the labor. The physical exertion, the cooperation, and the shared accomplishment strengthened their connection, creating a sense of purpose and resilience that extended beyond the cabin. and the letter. They also took time to visit the nearby cabins, checking on neighbors who had been affected by the storm. The interactions were brief but meaningful, offering small acts of kindness and support. She seemed more confident, moving through the community with awareness and care, and he felt pride and admiration for her resilience. The letter had revealed her strength in a new light, and he recognized that the courage she displayed was not only in surviving the storm, but in living honestly and openly with the truths of her life. Nighttime in the cabin became a time for reflection and quiet conversation. They spoke of the future, considering the days ahead, the possibilities, and the challenges. She expressed hopes and fears, and he responded with support and understanding. The conversations were honest, human, and deliberate, a way of navigating the complexities of life together. He realized that the letter had been a beginning, a way to confront the past, but the ongoing commitment to presence, care, and communication was what truly shaped their connection. He found himself thinking often about the fragility of life, the unpredictability of events, and the importance of empathy, awareness, and action. The storm had been a harsh teacher, showing the limits of endurance and the necessity of support. The letter had been a revelation, providing insight and understanding that could not have been achieved otherwise. Together they were learning to navigate the aftermath, to honor the past, and to build a future grounded in trust, care, and shared experience. Days turned into weeks, and the snow gradually melted, revealing the familiar landscape beneath. The mountains, the forest, and the town emerged slowly from the blanket of white, transformed but still recognizable. They moved through the world with awareness, noticing details, appreciating beauty, and supporting each other. The letter remained on the table, occasionally read and reflected upon, a reminder of the journey through fear, uncertainty, and revelation. He understood that the letter had not destroyed him, but it had changed him. It had revealed truths, confronted fears, and deepened connections. It had forced him to recognize the fragility of life and the importance of empathy, patience, and care. He felt a profound sense of responsibility to honor the trust and courage revealed in it, to support her fully, and to navigate the future with awareness and attentiveness. They continued to live in the cabin, moving carefully through routines, sharing responsibilities, and reflecting on the events that had brought them closer. Each day carried small lessons, moments of understanding, and acts of care. The bond between them strengthened, rooted in shared experience, honesty, and recognition of each other's strengths and vulnerabilities. The letter remained a guide and a symbol, shaping their interactions and perspectives, reminding them of the journey they had endured and the resilience of the human spirit as the seasons changed. The memory of the blizzard remained vivid, a story they would carry with them forever. The letter had been a catalyst, a revelation that transformed their understanding and connection. He knew that life would continue to bring challenges, uncertainties, and moments of fear. But the experience had taught them the importance of empathy, patience, and presence. The bond forged through adversity and honesty would remain, a foundation for navigating the complexities of life together, honoring the courage, trust, and humanity revealed in the journey through the storm and the letter. The weeks after the storm became a rhythm of quiet discovery. The snow had mostly melted, revealing the landscape beneath. But the memory of the blizzard lingered, a constant presence in the air, in the quiet moments, in the way he moved through the world. Each day began with small routines, tending the cabin, preparing simple meals, checking the surrounding woods and trails, and slowly stepping into life beyond the fire and walls of the cabin. She moved alongside him, her confidence returning, her energy steadying. Though there was still a shadow of the fear the storm had brought, they spoke often, gently, about the letter, about her experiences, and about what the future might hold, never rushing. Always allowing the space for reflection and understanding, he spent time reflecting on the truths the letter had revealed. It was more than words on paper. It was a lifeline, a confession, a message that demanded attention and patience. It had shown him aspects of her life he had never understood, struggles she had endured silently, choices she had made to protect both herself and him. and the quiet resilience that defined her existence. He realized the power of listening, of observing without judgment, and of offering presence instead of answers. He carried that understanding with him through each action of the day, whether gathering firewood, clearing paths, or simply sitting in quiet observation of the world. Beyond the cabin walls, together, they began exploring further beyond the immediate area. The town was slowly returning to life after the storm. Neighbors emerging to clear snow, check on each other, and repair damages. They walked among familiar places, noting how the landscape had been altered by the blizzard. How familiar trails were now filled with mounds of snow. How the river had shifted slightly, and how small details had changed. Each observation became a conversation, a chance to reflect on the storm and its impact, and a subtle way to understand one another more deeply. Her eyes often lingered on areas where the snow had been thickest, her mind tracing memories of her journey through the storm, and he listened attentively, offering quiet acknowledgement and respect for what she had endured. The letter was never far from his thoughts. It was revisited, not obsessively, but with deliberate intention. Each reading deepening his understanding of her history, and the bond between them. He shared portions aloud occasionally, not to interrogate or dissect, but to honor, to acknowledge, and to connect. She would listen, sometimes offering clarification, sometimes silent reflection, and together they built a dialogue that was patient, deliberate, and deeply human. He began to appreciate the courage it took for her to leave the letter, the trust implicit in sharing the truth, and the quiet vulnerability that existed beneath her composed exterior. Their conversations grew in complexity, moving beyond survival and the immediate aftermath of the storm to topics of hopes, regrets, dreams, and fears. She spoke of moments in the past she had never shared, of choices that had seemed necessary at the time, but weighed heavily in hindsight, fears that lingered even after the storm had passed. He responded with empathy, patience, and gentle inquiry, never pushing but always listening, allowing space for her to reveal, to reflect, and to process. The dialogue became a dance of understanding, each step taken with care, each word considered, each silence respected. He noticed changes in himself, too. The blizzard and the letter had altered his perspective, heightened his awareness of vulnerability and resilience, deepened his capacity for empathy, and made him more attentive to the subtle nuances of her behavior and emotions. He began to see patterns, small signals of discomfort or hesitation, and adjusted his actions accordingly, learning the unspoken language of trust and care. The connection between them had shifted, strengthened by shared adversity, mutual respect, and deliberate attention to each other's humanity. Days were punctuated by tasks that grounded them in reality. Gathering firewood, preparing meals, checking the structural integrity of the cabin, and clearing debris from paths were simple acts, but they carried significance. Each task was shared, each decision deliberate, each success small but meaningful. These moments created a rhythm, a stability that contrasted with the chaos of the storm, and provided a framework within which they could navigate both the physical and emotional aftermath. They laughed quietly when mishaps occurred, offered support when one faltered. I celebrated the completion of tasks with understated satisfaction. These routines became a testament to their partnership and shared resilience. They ventured further into the forest, tracing old trails, discovering paths hidden beneath the snow, and noting signs of wildlife returning to the area. Each excursion became a way to reclaim the landscape altered by the storm, to rebuild confidence, and to reinforce the sense of connection with the world outside the cabin. She moved with a growing steadiness, her presence both confident and cautious, and he found himself relying on her observations and instincts, creating a mutual dependence that felt natural, balanced, and affirming. They spoke of the storm, of moments of fear, and of the lessons learned, always returning to reflection and understanding rather than blame or recrimination. Evenings continued to be a time for quiet reflection. They would sit by the fire, the letter resting on the table between them, and speak of the past, present, and future. He read passages aloud at times, not to interrogate, but to honor the experiences described, to acknowledge courage and vulnerability, and to build a shared narrative of understanding. She would respond with reflections, clarifications, or additional stories, weaving her perspective into the ongoing dialogue. The firelight cast shadows that danced across the walls, echoing the complexity of the conversations, the depth of emotions, and the subtle transformations occurring within both of them. They discussed the future more openly now, considering possibilities, challenges, and hopes. She spoke of desires she had once hidden, of ambitions tempered by caution, of fears that lingered despite survival. He responded with support and practical consideration, offering presence and attention rather than solutions, recognizing that understanding and care were more valuable than immediate fixes. Each discussion was deliberate, each word chosen with care, creating a pattern of communication that reinforced trust, respect, and empathy. He reflected frequently on the lessons learned from the storm and the letter. Nature's power had reminded them of vulnerability, mortality, and the necessity of resilience. The letter had revealed truths, prompted reflection, and deepened human connection. Together, they had navigated fear, uncertainty, and revelation, and in doing so, had discovered the profound value of patience, attentiveness, and emotional honesty. He felt gratitude for survival, for the opportunity to support and understand her, and for the chance to witness courage and vulnerability in its raw form.